This is the Active Church. To God be the glory.
I want to talk to you today about the greatness of our God. And I want to ask you a question as we start the sermon. And the question is this: is the greatness of God obvious to you? You know, is it obvious to you when you sit there and you think about it? Is it obvious to you just how great God is? I would like to suggest something to you this morning, because I have a feeling that some of you might be struggling with the belief in the existence of a God who is greater than us. You know, I bet you as you're sitting here today, there are some of us that are sitting in this church, maybe even a lot of us sitting in this church, that although we come to church and we sing the song and we clap and we cheer and all that kind of stuff, when it comes to believing in a God who is greater than us and believing that He exists, we have a few challenges. And you know, in the Western world, we have certain problems that have come into our mindsets that have caused problems in terms of us in the West believing that there's this God that is greater than ourselves. And the problem has come in terms of our foundational thinking. And in terms of our foundational thinking, I just want to explain to you that Western civilization came out of Christianity. All of the thing where Western countries came and they started making all sorts of scientific discoveries and all that kind of stuff, most of those scientists who discovered many of those things like electricity and all of that stuff, most of them were Christians. And they actually started searching for scientific endeavors and doing all sorts of stuff because of their Christian faith. But then what happened was somewhere in the 19th century, in the 1800s, some guys came along with some other theories, and there was a new thinking that began to take a hold, and it took a hold into the 20th century. Into the middle of the 20th century, it really took a hold in a big way, and that was called modernism, or modernistic thinking. And modernism said that, you know, the ultimate goal for human beings is progress. That we must just make progress and we must get somewhere and we must get there. And, you know, if we just go along and we go with scientific discoveries, then human beings are going to end up in a place and they're going to be awesome and everything's just going to be brilliant. And I can remember when I was growing up, the number one word was progress. Anything that came in and hindered progress was seen as bad. But then in the middle of the 20th century, another type of thinking came, which is called postmodern thinking. And postmodern thinking is different to modern thinking in that, first of all, it comes after modern thinking. And there are certain things that happened because of modern thinking that left people disillusioned. And so after a period of time, when they saw the effects of modern thinking, they began to say, we don't accept that. And they started a new type of thinking, and more people latched onto this. And today, postmodern thinking is the overriding thinking in the Western world. And I want to tell you that as you're sitting here, most of us, in most of our thinking, even though we're Christians, even though we say we believe the Bible, we're actually influenced more by postmodern thinking than what we are by the Bible. And you might be sitting there and you might be thinking, well, what is postmodernism? Well, as I said, postmodernism, it's called postmodernism because it came after modernism, and it's described this way on a website called shiftingthinking.org. It says, postmodernism is this: there is a loss of faith in the idea of progress. The idea that we are gradually heading along the one true pathway towards certain universal goals, such as the full picture of knowledge or equality and justice. Instead, there is an emphasis on multiple pathways. You know, there's more than one way to God. There's all of those, so multiple pathways and plurality. On diversity, you hear that, diversity? We embrace diversity. On diversity and difference, and on the partiality of all knowledge. That is the idea that we can only have an incomplete picture, and the idea that all knowledge is biased. Change is not seen as a linear progression, but as a series of networks and flows, connections and reconnections, that because they are always forming and reforming, never have time to solidify. In other words, under modernism, you had solid ideas and you had a solid belief system. And now under postmodernism, there's no solidity in ideas. The ideas are what they call fluid because they're always changing. Non-stop changing. Now, I want you to understand is that when you look at how postmodernist people think, They blame Christianity for many of the problems that modernism brought. If you look at many of the problems that came, for example, when people came with the hippie movement, which is when all of this stuff really started becoming mainstream, they were actually reacting against parents who had a modernistic idea, not a Christian idea of the world. And so, first of all, when they look at all of these things, they blame all of those ideas which are on modernism on the church. Now, what is the key thing about postmodernism? And I want you to listen, because if you listen carefully, you're going to understand some things about how you think. Postmodernism says everyone has incomplete knowledge. In other words, none of us knows everything. And therefore, because of the fact that we have incomplete knowledge, when we look at a picture of the world, our picture is incomplete. And when we look at that incomplete picture, the fact is our picture is biased. And our picture is biased because of our experience. That's what postmodernism says. Every person has a picture, has a worldview, and their worldview is biased because they don't know everything. Postmodernism goes on and says this: because of the fact that your picture is incomplete, you tolerate all views. And you tolerate all views because everyone else has a piece of the picture you don't have. And so even if their piece of the picture contradicts yours, you accept and tolerate their views because of the fact that there's certain stuff that they've got and certain experiences that they've got and things like that that you don't have, and so they've got truth that you don't have. An example of this is a person by the name of Eusebius Mackiser. Now let me tell you about Eusebius Mackiser. First thing you need to know about Eusebius Mackiser is that he's openly gay. And he has on broadcasting media and all that, he's openly proclaimed that, and he's an open evangelist for the fact that, you know, there should be gay rights and the whole movement. He's an evangelist for it. The other thing about Eusebius Mackiser is that he is what's called an associate at the Wits Center for Ethics. In other words, he's one of the people there that's on the team that's formulating what Wits University believes to be ethics. So he's an academic. So he sits there with a number of other people, and they have all sorts of tasks where they sit there and they seek to define what does it mean to be ethical. The other thing that you find about Eusebius Mackiser is that he's also a talk show presenter on Radio 702. In fact, normally, unless he does one of the shows during the day, his show takes place between 9 and midnight on every weeknight. Now, Eusebius Mackiser was talking at a Wits University function, and he was giving a lecture. And during the lecture, I want to just give you a quote, and this was one from, I think, about October or November last year, where he said this: what is the connecting tissue between all the faculties? Now, all the faculties is all the different departments and subjects at the university. What is the connecting tissue between all the faculties? In other words, if you take all of the degrees that Wits University offers, what is the thing that connects them all? And he went on and he said this: what should a Wits degree really be about? And then he says this: you should leave with a critical and skeptical attitude towards your own belief set. So in other words, the fundamental reason, according to him, for Wits University being there is not to train people to become doctors and lawyers and all sorts of things like that. The underlying reason and the basic reason why Wits University is there, and the foundational principle upon which the university is founded, that when a person comes in there, when they leave that university, they should be critical of their own belief set. So in other words, if you go into Wits University and you go in there a Christian, their aim is that you walk out being critical of your belief system. In other words, you do not trust your own opinion. Why? Because as the postmodernist says, you do not have all the knowledge, and therefore everyone has a valid view, and no one's view counts more than others. And it might be true for you, and that's good for you, but don't force your opinion on everyone else. And I don't know how many of you have heard yourself saying that. You see, we are in this, and we have been indoctrinated in this, and this is the view that we have. And the other thing about postmodernism is that experience overrides what is read in books. So in other words, if you know certain history, for example, about the Second World War, and you know with the Nazi Holocaust and all this kind of stuff, but then your experience, because you've spoken to some people, and your experience now tells you, you know what, the Holocaust never happened, which are people in the world who actually say that the Holocaust which happened during the Second World War never happened. And the people you speak to are very convincing in giving their reasons as to why they say it never happened. The fact that there's concentration camps, that those buildings are still standing there in Poland and Germany and all over the place. I mean, be that as it may, that wasn't your experience. Your experience was speaking to this person, and they gave you some very convincing arguments, and now you believe, oh, the Holocaust was just a conspiracy, it didn't happen. And it was a Jewish conspiracy against the world. That's how postmodernist thinks. Experience overrides what is read in books. So then, taking this a little bit further, what happens with a postmodernist, if they want to know something about Islam, for example, a postmodernist will go and sit down with people who call themselves Muslim, and they will ask those people, what do you say Islam is? And they will form their opinions on Islam according to what those people say. They will not read the book of Islam. If they want to find out about Christianity, they will go and find people who claim to be Christian. And they will sit down with those people and they will ask them certain questions about Christianity, and they will form their opinions based on what certain people say. They won't go to the book. In other words, this is totally irrelevant when you want to study Christianity. And the reason why they do this is because, in their opinion, because of the way that they see the world, in their opinion, all religions are changing as people get more knowledge. And you'll hear them, for example, say, and you'll hear it even on places like 702, where they'll say, this and this happened, and this completely changed Christianity. For example, I heard a discussion in the early part of last year where they were talking about when Christianity came to Africa, and then Africa changed Christianity. Now, the reality is it didn't. If you're a Christian and you know Christianity and you know the history, you listen to what preachers are preaching today, and you can go and look at what preachers were preaching hundreds and hundreds of years ago. It's the same stuff. It hasn't changed. But they believe it has, because in their worldview and in their belief set, nothing can stay the same. Everything changes. So for the postmodernist, everything is fluid, it's changing, it's not static. And therefore, the existence of a God who does not change is not possible. When the Bible says that God is the same yesterday, today, and forever? For the postmodernist, that is not possible. For the postmodernist, there's no such thing. And therefore, because of this, the values and the morals that were around in 1950 no longer apply in 2013. Morals and values change as people's knowledge change and people's experiences change. And I want to tell you that this worldview has affected Christians too. It's affected Christians in a big way because of this, there's a lot of Christians sitting in a lot of churches around the place, and they struggle to believe in this God that is greater than them. And they have a hard time, and they're often skeptical. Even though they want to be a Christian, something inside of them makes them skeptical of what they want to believe because of what is indoctrinating them. Because I promise you right now, this is how we all think. And so as a result of this, the view of many Christians is that God is great, as in He's great as a jewel, but don't take this God thing too far. And Jesus is really, really cool for me. You know what I'm saying? But I'm not going to go and force Him on other people because He's cool for me and He might not be cool for them. Christians also say, I don't need to be committed to my church. I just need to be committed to the church. Christians will also say things like, I can't witness that Muslim there. I can't witness that Hindu. I can't go to that atheist and speak to them over there because you know what? I might offend him. And that's disrespectful because he or she has a piece of knowledge that I don't have. There's stuff that they know that I don't know. And so I can't go and tell them because I don't know everything. And I'm pretty sure some of you have heard that, and maybe some of you have even said those words. And it comes out of a postmodernistic worldview which is anti-biblical. And in a way, the postmodern worldview is correct. It is correct because none of us know everything. You can look around you yourself, and the people you're looking around, none of us knows everything. There's not one of us that knows everything. In fact, Dr. Miles Monroe, I once heard him say, and he spoke about all the degrees. He's got about 8 or 9 degrees. He's a very intelligent man, that guy. He's got more degrees, than I think he might even have more degrees than what I got years at school type of thing, if you know what I'm saying. But he said, the reason why they call it a degree, because when you finish that field of study, you only have a degree of knowledge in that field. You don't know everything. So that part is true. But postmodernism is only true with one assumption that has to be true. There's one assumption that has to be true for postmodernism to be true. And that is the assumption that God does not exist. And therefore, because God does not exist, therefore He cannot interact with our world. Because He did not exist, He did not create the world. And so God does not heal people. So whenever there's a healing and a Christian gets healed, or even a non-Christian gets healed by being laid hands on and someone prays for them in the name of Jesus, that healing cannot be true, and there must be some other explanation for it. And by the way, when you come to church according to the postmodern worldview, you're not serving God, you're serving the pastor. And the other thing is, the church is ripping you off by asking you for your money. It has to be the case, but only if there's no God. You see, I want to tell you that as a result of this, the majority of the Christians in the West do not recognize the greatness of our God because they have a postmodern mindset. And the foundation of their mindset is that God does not exist, therefore they do not become disciples of Jesus. And their chief source of information is people that they speak to that they respect. It's not the Bible, it's people that they speak to that they respect, or it's Google and Wikipedia, or it's 702, or it's magazines and TV and all sorts of other things. They've got all sorts of other sources for information that bring things into their experience. But the Bible is not a source of information for them. And when people tell them to read the Bible, reading the Bible becomes a chore. And it's something that I have to do, and it's like a legal thing. But I don't really know why I'm doing it, because the Bible hasn't got any answers for me. Does that make sense? Well, I want to tell you that we need to think about this, because if we're Christians and we're in church, then as far as I'm concerned, and this is the way I've always worked, I have to know that God's real, that He exists. I want to tell you guys, if I didn't in myself know for myself that God exists, I wouldn't be here today. I'd be doing something else. I wouldn't be wasting all of your time. There's a fallacy out there that says pastors make a lot of money. You understand what I'm saying? I'm telling you now, when I left Nedbank in January 2007, I still earned quite a bit less than what I earned then, and money was worth more than it is now. My salary was a lot more than what I'm earning here. And I have to work like 3 or 4 different jobs and get income from 3 or 4 different sources to be able to just cope with things. So I'm not in this for the money. And with the amount of problems that you have to deal with when you're running a church, it's not worth it if God's not real. You understand what I'm saying?